Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we're going to paint a sunrise over an alien planet. Our video today is sponsored by the awesome people over at Graphic Stock, who are currently offering an exclusive 7-day free trial where you can download up to 140 different images. I've put a link in the description below so that you can sign up for your free trial. Also, while you're in the video description, make sure you check out the entire list of materials for this painting today, and let's get started. Okay, so here we are on Graphic Stock's website. They have the largest unlimited download library on the internet of over 300,000 different vectors, photos, and illustrations. So let's look at some pictures of planets, not plants, planets. Because I've really been inspired by the TRAPPIST-1 system that was discovered with 7 different planets around it. And I really like that one. I'm gonna add that one to my folder. The cool thing about this website is all of these images that I like, that I'm bookmarking, I could come back here and download every single one of them and be able to use them in my projects without any kind of attribution. A lot of other websites like this, if I wanted to download each of these images that I'm bookmarking, I would have to pay upwards of $30 per image. And I don't know about you, but I don't have that kind of money to spend on an image that I may or may not paint. You know, with the $99 annual fee for Graphic Stock, if I had the time and the patience and the disk space, I could come in here and download all 300,000 plus images if I wanted to. I really like this one, and as you can see, I've already downloaded it. So now that I know exactly what I want to paint, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm painting on a brand new canvas. I haven't put gesso on it or anything. I'm going to take my 1-inch flat brush, wet it in my jar, and wipe it on the edge. Now I'm going to do a mix of phthalo blue and black on this background. It's going to be quite dark, but I don't want it to be pure black. So I'm going to load up with blue. Remember, if you squish the brush into the paint, that kind of sucks it up like a sponge. And then I'm just going to grab a corner of black and apply it kind of heavily so that you don't have to do too much in a second layer. I might have to do a second layer in a few areas, but I don't want to have to repaint it entirely. Now, as I mentioned before, I was really inspired by the 7 Earth-like planets that were discovered orbiting around the TRAPPIST-1 star. And so that was kind of my inspiration for this painting today. But I didn't want to use any of the artist renderings of, what they thought those planets might look like, because I wasn't sure what the copyright on them was. But using the image that I'm using off of Graphic Stock is awesome, because once you sign up for a membership, you get a 100% royalty-free agreement, which means that you can't be sued for using an image. So, whereas if I took one of the artist renderings and use that, if it were under copyright, I could find myself in trouble. But I can take this image and paint it exactly, and I'm not in risk of doing that. So that's really awesome. Now I'm gonna let this dry completely, because while it's wet, you can't really tell how dark it is, because the paint has a binder in it that when it's wet, it's a little bit white. So that's why sometimes you see darker colors like this, they dry much darker, and transparent colors dry much more transparent. It's because that binder goes from white to clear. It's clear when it dries. So once this is dry, I will come in and probably just touch up some of these transparent areas, and then we'll get started. All right, so that's dry. Let's do one more coat just in some of these super transparent areas. All right, now we're gonna start laying in our galaxy, and I'm using my small cloud brush. If you don't have my brushes, that's perfectly fine. You can use any kind of brush you're comfortable scrubbing with. And my brushes should be available on my website very soon. So I'm going to take a bit of black and mix it with some blue. I'm using about 1 part black to 2 parts blue. So very similar to the background. And I'm going to get a bit of white and lighten it up. I want it noticeably lighter than the background, but not terribly lighter. So decide where you want your galaxy to be and just kind of start there. So I'm going to start right about here. Notice I'm not putting full pressure on my brush. It's really just the tip of the brush. And I'm kind of scrubbing lightly with it to lay in that shape. And once I've got some of my shape in, then I can come back down here with light pressure, especially right now while I have a lot of paint on my brush, and just start breaking that line up. And I'm going to carry this color back pretty far, because if you look at our image, the sky isn't super dark the whole way. It's got a little bit of a lighter glow to it. So notice as I move farther back, I've got a little more pressure on my brush, and that's because the paint is kind of wearing off. So I don't have quite as heavy amount of paint as I used to. I'm not trying to cover the entire background. I'm letting parts of it kind of poke out here and there. Sometimes I apply this color a little heavier, sometimes a little bit lighter. Good amount of pressure there because I'm really starting to get low on paint. I don't know if you can hear the wind out there, but it is so windy here today. I'm really hoping I don't lose power. We had a super bad windstorm about this time last year. It blew our power out for, it was about 24 hours. So if that happens with this windstorm, hopefully it happens after I record and upload the video. See, I'm still just on that first load of paint. See how far out I'm taking it? The number one thing I want you to remember here is to be patient. Give yourself the time that you need to get this done. Don't get impatient and grab way too much paint or put too much pressure on it or even use too light of a color. Just, build those layers up slowly. I think that if you use too much paint or if you go too light right off the bat, you're gonna have a difficult time and you'll get frustrated. But if you take a little bit of extra time and really work those layers in slowly, I think you'll be much happier and certainly you'll be less frustrated. See, down here I'm scrubbing pretty good because I don't have a ton of paint left on my brush. And we'll do the same thing up here. Kind of start somewhere and push that back, scrub it out into nothing. Whenever we do scrubbing and clouds and things like that, I always have people show me their painting and tell me that they don't like the way that it turned out. And I would say the vast majority of the time that I see that, it's because it appears that they used way too much paint. Just grabbed big globs of paint and kind of centered it into these little balls of color. Using just a little bit of paint, you can always get more paint, but if you apply too much, then you're gonna have a hard time getting rid of it. So just a bit. My brush is fairly dry. I mean, there's paint on here, but see, there's not a lot coming off on my finger. That's about what you're looking for. And then don't be afraid to scrub. Use a brush you're comfortable scrubbing with. If you don't have my brushes, you can just pick a brush that you're fine dedicating to scrubbing. You do want to make sure it's pretty much a dedicated scrubbing brush because as you scrub with it, it's gonna kind of splay out the bristles a little bit and almost ruin the brush. But if it's dedicated to scrubbing, that's okay, because then it will just become a better scrubber every time you use it. I picked up a lot of paint there, so I'm barely using any pressure on my brush. And these internal shapes here, they can be really solid or they can be really fuzzy and kind of disappear into the center. Whatever you prefer. Since I'm not painting Earth, this might not even be our galaxy that I'm painting. This might not be the Milky Way. Maybe it's Andromeda or something else. But you know, now that we're discovering that there are more planets out there that are Earth-like, there could be any number of things out there. So if you paint something space, then there's a good chance that something out there in space looks just like what you painted. So don't put pressure on yourself and think that this has to look a certain way, or that it's not going to look realistic if it doesn't look like our galaxy or our planet. I'm just kind of getting rid of some of this paint up through this area. And we'll move on to a lighter color. All right, now I'm just going to take a little bit more white and mix it in with that color we were just using. We want a color lighter than that. I'm going to wipe a little bit of that paint off. I don't want too much paint. And we're just going to lighten up some areas. I'm not going to take this out quite as far as I did that first color, and I don't even need to cover everything with it. I'm just going to give some highlights here and there. Super light pressure that I'm using. Make sure you stand back to look at this every once in a while. When you're looking at it up close, you really can't see how the colors work with or against each other, or where you have a hole in the color, or where you want to add something else. So don't judge it right up close. Get back and away from it, and then decide. I'm going to put a little more pressure there, get a bit of extra paint. And lighter here to break up the line and bring it back. I think that painting can absolutely be an excellent exercise in mindfulness and in patience, perseverance, all of those things that I need practice in. You know, I'm very impatient in a lot of areas of my life, and so I try not to let myself be impatient while I'm painting. This is my time to practice being a patient person, and it's amazing how when you give yourself permission to be patient and let things happen in their own time, build up slowly, it's very relaxing, and I think that it absolutely can transfer into other areas of your life. You know, just like painting, I think that being patient is almost a skill. Just like painting, you can learn how to be patient, but you have to put the energy into it. You have to be willing to practice it. So practice it here if you're not a patient person, like me. I'm just kind of scattering some extra little light spots throughout here. Maybe a little bit down in here. All right, let's come in and just grab a tiny bit of white. See, I just pulled out a tiny bit and then kind of tapped it off here. And in just a few areas, I'm going to add some bright white. Not a ton of it. I'm even going to scrub that out into here, just make sure I've got some nice lighter areas. So I'm not being real structured here, but I'm also not being super random and just scattering it wherever. I'm putting it where it feels like it needs to go. Okay, so I cleaned off my brush and I dried it on a paper towel pretty good. And now I have a tiny drop of Alizarin Crimson and Cadmium Yellow. And I'm just gonna grab a tiny bit of the crimson. I didn't grab very much at all. And a tiny bit of the yellow. Kind of mix them right there and get them on the end of my brush, but I have very little paint. Now over these white areas, I'm just gonna kind of lightly scrub this color onto it. It's okay if you go outside of it because these colors are so transparent, they're not gonna show up on the dark anyway. I think I'm gonna add just a little more crimson. Really just in these super light areas. I'm using such little paint. Again, don't go overboard and try and do it all in one fell swoop. It's going to frustrate you and make a mess that you're going to have a hard time cleaning up. This is just going to help give it a little bit of an iridescent look. Now I cleaned off my brush again, dry it on my paper towel, and I'm gonna get the tiniest speck of white and mix it onto the end of my brush. We're working with almost no paint here and almost no pressure. I'm just gonna lightly drag over top of some of these to kick them back just a little bit and make sure they blend with everything else nicely. And I have just a tiny bead of the white paint right on the end of my brush, and I'm just pushing it onto that front spot there. So just a little bit of that red yellow kind of glows through. And if you do too much of it, too much white, and you feel like you lost some of your red yellow, just let it dry and add it back on. Okay, now we're gonna do some stars. So I dipped this in my water and just shook off an extra drip. I'm gonna pull a bit of white out and mix the water that's in my brush in with that white. Now I know a lot of people have a hard time with stars when they do them because they get like flips and weirdness everywhere. So we're gonna spend a minute here, and the first hint I'm gonna give you is to kind of roll some of it off. You don't want a ton of paint. See, I let some of it come off of there. The more paint you have on your brush, the more likely it is to kind of splatter everywhere and get long streaks, and you get a lot more kickback. The next tip is to hold your brush straight up and down. I mean, you can angle it, but you don't want it angled toward the canvas. You don't want it angled toward you. You want it parallel to the canvas. Now, just to test out how much paint I have on here, I'm just gonna hit against this brush lightly. So that's not too bad. I have some little stars there. I didn't get any big streaks, so I can keep going. If you get some little spots that you really just hate, just kind of tap them out until they're gone. Now remember that when you tap, it's gonna kind of go in a line in the direction your brush is facing. So if I'm straight up and down and I give a good tap, it's pretty much in a line. So if you want to concentrate your stars along this line, then you would just tilt your brush that way. but I recommend kind of turning it all different directions so you don't end up with any obvious lines. Take your stars over the entire canvas, but I am going to concentrate them toward the edge here. Don't splatter where you've got nice furniture and artwork that you don't want to destroy. As you splatter and your brush starts to empty out, your stars are going to get much smaller and more transparent. And I think that that's a good thing. So keep going until you're not getting any other stars, and that way you can get all different sizes and densities of stars. I grabbed just a tiny drip more water and mixing it back in with my paint. I'm going to get a few more heavy stars, especially here in this area. Now, sometimes in space there's little holes where we don't see any stars. So I've cleaned my brush off. I'm going to grab a little hint of black, just a little bit. Kind of brush some of that off. And we'll decide where some of those holes are going to be. Kind of feel like there's one here, so I'm just going to lay in a little bit of black and then kind of tap it and smear it around with my finger. I can take it up into that color a little. And just completely obliterate the stars there. Smear over top of that color, and that helps push it deeper. We'll do a little bit right in here. Now the next thing we're going to do is decide where our light ray is going to be. Now if you notice in the photo, all of the circles coming off of the light ray, they're not randomly scattered. They're on a line that meets up with where the sun is coming over the edge of the planet. So I found for me that it was easier to draw out my line and then my planet, but whatever you're more comfortable with. So I'm going to take a ruler, and I want my line to end right about 1.5 inches from the edge of the canvas here. Well, maybe a little closer to 1 inch. And roughly about 1/2 inch from the bottom here. So I'm going to line it up there and then just gently hold it onto my canvas. If you're using a stretched canvas, don't push too hard because you'll bow it in and then your line might be crooked. So I'm going to take a piece of chalk and just make my line. Now, if you have something large enough for the shape of the planet that you want to use to trace it, that's fine. I don't have anything, so I'm just going to freehand it. So I'm first going to make a mark about where the center of my canvas is. And that's roughly where I want the top of my planet, and I may end up moving it up or down as I sketch it out, but I'm going to start there. Okay, so now I have my 1/2 inch flat brush, and I'm going to load up with a little bit of white. I do have a bit of water on here. And before I start filling in anything, I want to get my line on here, make sure that it's nice and straight. And remember, to draw a crisp line, we always use the edge. Don't try and get a crisp line like this. It's not going to happen. Your line's going to get away from you. So use the edge of your brush like that and turn it as you come around. I'm starting in just a little bit more than I want my planet to be, because that'll leave room for corrections. And again, stand back to look at it, to judge whether or not it's straight. Don't judge it standing right in front of it. Get, 5-6 feet away. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So I cleaned off my brush. I'm going to load it up with blue and a little bit of black, just like we did on the background, and start filling this in. Now all my brush strokes are gonna kind of match the upper shape of the planet. So kind of in an arc. And I'm using quite a bit of paint to help keep the paint wet longer so that I can blend. If you use matte medium, if you have some and you like to use it, this would be a perfect opportunity to use it to help you get a nice blend here. But I'm trying to show you guys some things that I usually do with matte medium, how to do them without. I am going to use some matte medium later on because there's some things that you can do them without, but it just doesn't look the same. Okay, so I took that dark blue-black color up pretty far, about an inch from the edge. I'm gonna wipe off a lot of that paint on my brush. I didn't clean it off because I still want some of that blue-black there. And I'm gonna load up with white, lay it down just above, back and forth, and take it down in. And then back and forth and bring it back out. And that's how you get a nice smooth blend. You can have some little streaks here and there of darker color in the lighter color and vice versa. Use the edge of your brush here and there to help streak out any lines. If you get a hard line, sometimes going over it with the brush flat doesn't really get rid of it. But if you turn your brush on its edge, you can get rid of some of those lines. I just have some globs of paint here, so I'm just going to smooth those out so that they don't affect the way our clouds look. And then I'm going to let this dry, and we'll come back and start putting in some clouds and atmosphere into our planet. All right, so our planet's dry. Let's go ahead and add some clouds. Now, if you look at our image, the clouds are really just kind of scattered white movements all over the place. We have some that are a little more faint and some that are brighter. So I'm going to start with the more faint ones. Now, my brush is very slightly damp. I washed it off and then wiped it on a paper towel, but I didn't try and dry it off necessarily. So I'm going to grab just a little bit of white and mix it in with the water on my brush. Kind of tap some of it off. And then we'll just start kind of scrubbing some in. I'm going to start in the lighter area because that will help get rid of some of the heavy paint so I don't get too bright in areas that I don't want. Just some super random shapes. This isn't like painting clouds in a landscape at all. You don't have to worry about shape or highlights, lowlights, anything like that here. Just using a little bit of paint and just kind of scrubbing them on. Some areas will be a lot heavier with the clouds, and some areas will maybe only just have a few. Every once in a while, I dip my brush back in the water and then wipe it quickly on a paper towel. If your cloud happens to get outside of your planet, like let's say you do something like that, just quickly before that gets a chance to dry, take a damp brush and you can easily wipe it away. It's just always good to make sure you have a damp brush on hand for things like that. You can always wipe it with your finger if you're getting some shapes that are just a little too regular from the brush. I know some of you don't like to get your hands into the paint. You don't like the full contact painting. I love it. I have no problem getting paint all over my hands. Now we got some heavier white. We're gonna work on getting some nice, bright, heavier clouds in here. This painting might be really fun if you used some colors other than blue. You know, if you tried like some red or something, purple. Maybe this planet looks more like Mars. You know, these planets, we don't know yet what their atmospheres are like, or even if they have atmospheres, they may not even have atmospheres. And, you know, once we discover that, we might find out that they're not even blue, like our planet. I'm just kind of tapping and wiping there. Don't be afraid to get it right up to the edge, even if that means you go off a little bit. The clouds would be wrapping around the planet. They wouldn't just be on the face that you see, so you might see them disappear over the edge to the side of the planet you can't see. Don't try and avoid that edge and keep all of your clouds, you know, like a ½ an inch away from the edge, because that's gonna make it look flat and less realistic. In fact, I kind of like the way that's looking. So I'm just going to kind of lay down a blob there. And just kind of randomly streak it through like that. I like that a lot. So I'm going to keep doing that. And then I might break it up here and there with a little bit of scrubbing from the brush. I'm going to do a bit of that over here because it gave a different look, and so I want to have a little bit of a consistent look from one side of the planet to the other. And we'll get a few bright clouds down in this area. See how I'm just kind of scattering my brush strokes, just kind of letting the brush do what it wants to do. And I'm really liking the way that's looking. Again, don't forget to walk away from it completely, 5-6 feet. Check and make sure that that's what you want it to look like before you decide to move on. And I think I'm pretty happy with that. So the next thing we're going to do is add our sun. And I want my sun to be right here where this line meets up with the edge of the planet. So I'm going to use this little 1/4 inch filbert, and it's wet in my jar, and I'm going to load up with white paint, quite a bit. And I want this to be a nice big glow. So I'm going to start by drawing just kind of a half circle. And then from there, I'm going to work it outwards. Don't worry about this circle right now being fully bright. You just want to focus on getting the shape and the size in there and making sure that you don't have a hard line. Like I have a hard line in there right now, but I'm slowly, with very little pressure on my brush, just going to work that hard line out. So again, this is another time when you want to take your time, be patient. Don't use too much paint. Don't put too much pressure on your brush. I'm just lightly dusting this back and forth. Very little pressure. I still have quite a bit of paint on here, but as you can see, there's not a ton of paint coming off. And that's all because of the pressure that I'm putting on my brush. Don't try and avoid your planet, because we are actually going to come back and add a little bit of this into the planet too. But right now my focus is this kind of glow around the edge. So see, I'm working in small sections. I'm not trying to take it from one end all the way around. And I'm going to dust that out until it about disappears. Now again, this is another area that you could use matte medium, and that would help you get a really nice transparent look. So you can do this absolutely without matte medium like I am, but it's just going to look a little bit different. And that's not a bad thing, it's just a different thing. See how far out I'm taking that? And notice I still have quite a bit of paint. It's pretty much gone from the end, but that's all I'm using is the very end of the brush. That's why there's not a lot of paint coming off. If I accidentally put too much pressure on right now, I'm gonna get a big white spot there. See right here, I want to add a little more, so I'm gonna put a little bit more pressure there, get a little bit more white paint there. I'm just gonna bring some of that down a bit onto the end of my brush. But if you reload or bring it down to the end of the brush like I just did, you want to make sure that your next brush stroke starts here where you want it nice and bright. Don't start a brush stroke, clear out here where you want it faded if you have a fresh glob of paint on your brush, because you're going to get a big white spot there. Patience, lots of patience. Give yourself the time here. And again, make sure you stand back and look at it to make sure that it's circular and even, that the light's not shining farther out on one side or the other. This is just dry brushing. At this point, my brush is almost dry. I haven't gotten more water. Okay, now I'm gonna get a bit more paint, and we'll come down here into the planet and kind of mirror this shape, but we don't have to put as much energy into it. I think that the light from this sun wouldn't necessarily be glowing quite as hard on the planet as it is around it. But we're just gonna mimic it a bit. And with the clouds and the lighter color and everything, you can't see it quite as much, so you don't have to put as much energy into it on this part. Just an insinuation that it's there. I think that's good. So I for sure want that center brighter, so I just dipped straight into my white paint. And with really light pressure, I'm just dusting it on there. Now into my circle shape. And break up my line. I'm essentially doing the same thing that I just did. And I got a little too much there. That's okay, I'll just take my damp brush, very, very slightly damp brush, and just lightly wipe that. There we go. I didn't scrape at it, I just lightly touched it with that damp brush. In our image here, you can see that there's another one that's kind of a reflection of the sun right about in here. So I'm gonna come at it with the tip of my brush, just kind of start swirling. I'm pretty much inside of the planet. It'll extend out past it a little bit, but I'm trying to keep it on that line. So pay attention to wherever it is that your line is. We're gonna do the same thing, dust that out around it, but on a much smaller scale. We're not gonna go out quite as far or as big with this one. And let's brighten up that center. Just a little blob of white. I'm barely touching the paint right now. I'm barely touching the canvas. Just enough to smear it a little. There we go. All right, we are about done. The next thing we're gonna do is block in where the sunbursts are. And again, they're all along this line that we made here. So just kind of looking at my photo, I've got one, I'm using my chalk. I've got one around this guy that's kind of red, so we'll add that in. There's one, let's see, there's one right here. There's one right about here, kind of a small one. Got a large one that goes off up here, and I'm going to use this lid to trace that shape, making sure it's about on my center line. Got one kind of sitting in it here. And then there's just a couple others. And I mean, you can do these however you want. You don't have to do them right where I'm doing them or right where they are in the photo. Do them wherever you want. But they do pretty much sit on the line. Now I am going to use some matte medium for this part because I tried it several times, several different ways without using matte medium, and I just wasn't able to get the look that I wanted. But if you don't have matte medium, absolutely go ahead and try it. You would just use kind of a dry brushing technique like we did here. I just didn't like the way that that looked for me using the dry brushing technique with these colors. So I have my filbert that I just wet a little bit in my jar. And let's start with this one here. So I'm going to load up with some matte medium and a little bit of yellow. And you know, in this picture, that light almost looks like it's got a hint of green, so I have the tiniest speck of blue there. See how strong that blue is? Wow, it just took over. I'm going to wipe off a lot of that. Pick up some more yellow. There we go. Because I just want it to be ever so slightly green, more yellow. And get me some matte medium again. These don't have to have real definite edges. You can do them really soft edged, just like the sun there. And see how when we overlap something, you can really see the color. This one up here I feel like is about that same color. So I'm going to get a little bit more of that and a little more medium. I'm going to draw out the edge of it first because I like how the edge of this one is more colored than the inside. It almost fades as it gets to the inside. So I'm just going to go back and forth over it. It doesn't have to have a solid line. And in a little bit more, a little more medium, and just keep bringing it in until that color fades out. I think I might add just a little bit more color to it on the edge, at least. Just because this is a darker area and I want to make sure I can see it. A little medium to help blend that. We're going to do that on this one here. Just a nice little small one. These are almost like the bokeh lights, but not really. Now these two I feel like are a little more orange, but I don't want to take it over top of any of these that are still wet. So we'll go ahead and do our red ring around this one. I just hit this one with my blow dryer for a minute because I don't want to drag that color. So I'm going to get just a little bit of Alizarin Crimson and some matte medium. And I'm going to use the edge of my brush. I'm not going to use it flat. I'm going to use the edge and just kind of dust it around in that circle shape. because again, I don't need a solid edge. It can kind of fuzz out. I don't want to take it over top of this real bright spot because it's kind of fading it out, so I just kind of stopped there. Let's mix up a slightly orange color. So just a little bit of Alizarin Crimson and with this yellow and some matte medium. And I'm going to fill in this one. Let's go just slightly redder with this next one. This one right here. Take it right over top of that first one. And then our last one. I'm gonna get some of this red. I still have the yellow on here, so it's still gonna be slightly orange. And I'm gonna get quite a bit of medium. And this one isn't a full circle that's painted in, it's just an edge, kind of like this one here. So I'm gonna use the edge of my brush and kind of work back and forth like that. If you get a hard line you can't dust out, just grab a tiny bit of matte medium and that will help. Okay, now while we have the chalk lines on there, it kind of looks jumbled and it's hard to tell exactly what you're looking at. So once this is completely dry, I'll clean off those chalk marks and then we'll come back and decide if it's done or if we want to adjust anything. Okay, I just took a slightly damp brush and wiped away all those chalk lines. They come off super, super easy. And I think I'm pretty satisfied with the way everything looks. So I'm just going to sign it and call it done. And there's your sunrise over an alien planet. Thank you again to my awesome sponsors over at Graphic Stock for making this video possible for us today. Don't forget to click the link in the description below so you can get your exclusive free 7-day trial to Graphic Stock. If you'd like to sign up for my mailing list so you know when the next batch of brushes is available, you can click here to go to my website. If you'd like to keep painting with me today, check out these 2 videos I've picked just for you. Thank you as always for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.